echoes on the radio. Back when I lived in my hometown, I would often go for late night drives on the back roads. Whenever I felt restless, the town was small, surrounded by forests and farmland, so once you got away from the main street, there was hardly any traffic, even in the day. Once night fell, the roads were totally dead, the perfect place to go to think things over or just step back and be alone. I used to turn the radio on low, scroll through the local channels, or just let my thoughts mull in my mind to the background of the engine humming. The last time I went out on one of these drives, however, it ended up giving me a lot more to think of than I had hoped for. At the time, I was dealing with some personal stuff that I'd rather not admit to people that I don't really know, but I hoped that once I got out on the road alone, I would be able to start setting things straight in my mind. I pulled out onto one of the smaller highways right around the time that the sun was setting and turned on my radio to scan through the local stations. As usual in this area, most of them came in with some interference, a trade-off when you live in more secluded parts of the country. The static was even worse than normal, and having a car with a pretty weak antenna, that was really saying something. I turned the dial back to off and decided that tonight I could get along with just the road noise for company. It was a nice night, and I had left earlier than I typically did, so I ended up straying pretty far from the customary back roads and ended up in an area I wasn't familiar with. This didn't really concern me, as I have a pretty good sense of direction and there was lots of gas still in the tank. I turned the radio back on in order to see if there were some better stations around these parts. Flipping through them got me some of the same stations as earlier, but even more garbled than before, as well as one or two new god-awful pop country stations that seemed to be coming stronger than the rest. I kept scrolling through white noise until I came upon a pretty clear signal that sounded like a DJ talking in between tracks. Hopeful that I finally found a tolerable station, I waited to see what song he would play next. He talked for a bit how he would be getting to some new tracks later in the night, but first he had some things he wanted to talk about. He launched into a full-scale deconstruction of the court system. How bullshit it was that someone could be accused of something with little to no evidence. He began naming off dozens of cases of wrongful convictions and explaining about how even if you were proven innocent, you aren't free and clear from legal costs or the disdain of your peers. I hadn't been listening to the station very long when the white noise started to crowd the signal, but it was still strong enough that it was mostly audible. You know, an accusation like that doesn't exist in a bubble. Rumours spread, and there is no such thing as presumption of innocence in the court of public opinion. But hey, that's just the way it is. As static started to take over his voice, I remember hearing him say, You never know who really is there for you when you need it, and sometimes it turns out that there's nobody. Right around then I lost the signal completely. It took me a few minutes to find a road to turn onto to get back in range, and slowly the signal started to grow stronger. It only could have taken a few minutes to get back onto a parallel road, but in that time he had gotten much more agitated and frantic. The first thing that came across the speaker being a lamentation of his own isolation, something along the lines of, "Hell, God didn't make man to handle things all on his own. It's even worse when you get a little taste of what it's like to count on someone, but to suddenly find out that at the slightest provocation they turn tail and run." He went on like this for a while longer, and my interest changed from some minor curiosity about this guy to genuine concern. I knew nothing about him and had only heard him speaking for a few minutes at most, but the inflection in his voice and what he was saying really drew me in. Meanwhile, he continued on his tirade. Fuck, maybe they weren't in the wrong after all. Maybe I'm just such a problem to be around and they just needed an excuse to leave. Probably would make it easier on everyone if they never had to think of me again. I knew that I had to try and find this guy to talk him down, or at least understand what caused him to get to this point. Based on how quickly I lost and regained the signal, I figured that the broadcast had a pretty limited range, and it soon dawned on me that it must be the forest to my right, as I had been driving past the block when I first got within range and turned back onto when I picked him up again. At the time I assumed that the broadcast must be one of those smaller private radio stations, and that he was working out of the plot of land I was driving past at that very instant. I figured there must be a driveway somewhere for him to have gotten a radio outfit into the woods, which made up the plot to the right of me, and I hadn't remembered passing by any obvious ones while on the other two roads, so I kept my eyes peeled for one on this side of the road. Meanwhile, the station had gotten disturbingly silent, with the once animated host not uttering a word. This worried me even more than when he had been frantic. Unsure of what this really meant, I started to speed up, now going well above the speed limit, desperately searching for a turn-off or opening where I could enter the dense forest. The static picked up again as I got further down the road, and as much as I hated losing his broadcast, I had no choice but to keep driving until I saw a turn-off. I nearly drove past it before I slammed on my brakes and made a hard right onto the overgrown potholed dirt road that led right into the heart of the woods. Soon after I got on the road, the signal came back. He was much more quiet and reserved now, and very far away from the microphone. He was nearly inaudible until I cranked the volume as high as I could. So, I hope you enjoyed this last broadcast from the Red Cabin Station, because I really fucking didn't. I'm sure it wasn't what you expected, but hey, that's life, ain't it? In the background I could hear something being moved around, like a desk or a chair being dragged across the floor. The last thing he said was, "Who am I kidding? It's not like anyone is really listening anyway. I heard a clattering, something big and heavy falling over, and the signal went silent. Not into static, but completely silent. It took a few very long minutes to reach the end of the dirt road. After things went quiet, it opened into a kind of semi-clearing with lots of brush and some short, stunted saplings. I could see nothing but woods surrounding me, with the exception of the occasional pair of headlights driving on the highway in the distance. There were no lights shining from a cabin's window, and no shadows in the woods that could even look like the outline of a building. I got out of my car to get a better look. Standing in the glow of my headlights, I circled the clearing. As I got to the far left of the clearing, I got a better look at one of the shadows I thought was just another tree, and as I closed in on it, I saw that it was the stump of a small radio tower, the type that old TV antennas would be mounted on. I could see now that it was badly rusted, with some pits so deep in the frame that they ran all the way through. Despite the condition of it, I couldn't help but feel vindicated that this could certainly have been where the signal could have originated. Spurred on by this, I ran across the clearing, looking for anything that could bolster this discovery. About halfway across, however, I tripped and fell flat on my face. When I looked back to see what had sent me sprawling, I could clearly see a fragment of concrete sticking out of the ground. I rose to my feet, and looking around, I saw the outline of a concrete foundation for a small building or cabin. I searched the entire woodlot that night, desperate to find the broadcast station of the tiny radio channel and discover the fate of this strange narrator. In the end, there was only the foundation and a crooked antenna tower, and I had no choice but to get back in my car and take the long drive home. As I drove out the clearing, I noticed that the white noise had come back, and I left the radio off for the rest of the night. For a short time after, I asked around the area if there were any private radio stations out in the sticks, or if anyone knew of the broadcast. None of my friends had heard of any local independent broadcasters, certainly none by the name of Red Cabin Station. Undeterred, I asked my parents and their friends. A few remembered tuning into 8 illegal stations in their youth, and told me of the weird unlicensed music they heard presented by nearly deranged DJs, and how interesting it was to them at the time, but none had heard of the one I encountered, and most even seemed to be utterly bemused by the idea that there would be any around in modern times. The only time I got anything remotely close to closure, in my experience, was talking to the elderly clerk at the county gas station. He didn't know anything about the Red Cabin per se, but he expressed a great interest in my story. Once he heard the whole thing through, he relayed to me some folk knowledge. Radio waves didn't just fade once a broadcast finished. The energy from those transmissions would bounce around space. The more energy in the broadcast, the longer it would stick, just like an echo. These days, I don't listen to the radio often. The last thing I want to do is find another echo like that. Last Friday. I've heard of a place out here where I live. It's on one of the back roads of the Alaskan new growth forests, in one of these valleys. They say that if you drive down this road on a day when the sun is shining so brightly as to make everything appear black and white, then you might come across a girl walking along the side of the road. She is said to be easy to recognize because whether it is summer or winter, she is always wearing a heavy wool overcoat and a set of oversized headphones, like those big skull candy headphones you can find in the stores. According to this story, if you drive up alongside her and roll down the window, you might hear her singing the song some people around here say is Rezo's Cerise, Gloomy Sunday. If you interrupt her asking the question before she's finished the song, it's said that her answer will be, I can't remember. And that in the next town that you enter, you will be arrested for the kidnap and murder of this girl. However, if you were to wait for her to finish and then ask the question, being, when did it last snow? And this is to be asked no matter what season it is, she will give you one of three possible answers. If she says Thursday, you will continue to drive ahead as if nothing has happened. But though you will be able to see and control your actions, it will be through a thick fog, as if you were asleep. You will live out the rest of your life in this empty dream state, and when you die, your soul will be condemned to a black emptiness. If the answer is today, then you are far more fortunate. You will continue on to your destination without event, and upon returning home, find that your greatest wish has been realized. However, if her answer is last Friday, then may whatever entity controls our fates have mercy on you. You will vanish for over a year. No one will have the slightest clue where you have gone, and your family, in despair, will give you up for dead. Then on a Friday, during the following year's snow melt, your body will be found hanging from an old black spruce in one of these swamps. Your face will have been eaten away, and your body in such a state of decay that you'll only be identified by your dental records. Your spirit, however, will be trapped, forced to walk the road every day when the sun is so bright that everything seems black and white. How do I know this? I have never done this myself, only heard the stories, but I have also lived up here for most of my life, so I can tell you this honesty. 6 years ago, this entity was a little boy. Then they found my sister. The shaman. Many years ago, there lived a very powerful shaman. Many people went to see him, for he was able to summon the spirits of their dead relations from beyond the grave. These spirits would then possess him and converse with their living relations through him. At the same time, there was a very eminent doctor in the region who had great ambitions not only in the medical field but also in politics. He sought to be a community leader, and he wanted to lead the people through the knowledge and wisdom he had obtained from his overseas Western education. The doctor was appalled when he discovered his own wife was visiting this shaman in order to talk to the spirit of her dead grandmother. When he scolded his wife and forbade her to visit the shaman again, he found that friends and relations of her inner circle would take her side and warn him against doubting the power of the shaman. Furious, he vowed to prove them all wrong. That night he drove over to the shaman's house together with his wife and some friends and relatives. He instructed his wife and the others to remain in the car while he and his brother went to test the shaman's power in order to prove the hoax. He lied that his wife was dead and he wanted to speak with her spirit. The shaman, not knowing that this was the husband of one of his regular customers, went into the ritual of the trance. It was an elaborate ceremony, for this invoked the very guardian of the gate between the world of shadows and the land of the living. After half an hour or so, the shaman collapsed in exhaustion, having tried without success to summon the spirit. There were many others present in the house of the shaman, beside the doctor and his brother. The doctor gloated over the shaman's failure and denounced him as a charlatan to the others. He said people must never believe such superstitious nonsense again. At this point, the whole room was stunned by the sudden movements of the shaman. He sat bolt upright in a rigid lotus position and began to weep in a woman's voice. The cry was so eerie, even the doctor was afraid. What kind of trickery is this? The doctor stammered. What have you done? Said the wailing voice. Oh, what have you done? Because of the summoning, they have brought me into the shadow lands just for you. The doctor couldn't believe what he was hearing. It was his wife's voice coming from the shaman's lips. Reeling in horror, the doctor rushed out to the car, fearing the worst. He found his wife slumped in the car, dead. Those who were with her said she shrieked suddenly and died in an instant, just about the same time as he had heard the weeping voice. Can you help me find my cat? I was out one night in December, around midnight. It was terribly cold, being the day after Christmas. I sighed deeply, almost amused at seeing my breath. I was tired, walking home from my friend Ricky's house. We'd just got done eating a ton of snack food and playing Pokemon, battling over and over, like when we were kids. How I miss those days. I'm 17 now, and kind of a nerd. I don't have a lot of friends, but I cherish the ones I do have. I don't have a girlfriend, but do have a crush or two. Anyway, I loved taking walks at night. It was so quiet and peaceful. I also really loved the cold air caressing my cheeks and fingers. I sighed again, almost home. Just a block away was my house, where I lived with my mum and two bratty younger sisters of 15 and 10. Part of me didn't want to go home, worried Mum would catch me up late and scold me for being out alone. Suddenly, I saw her. She was pretty, kind of short, but not a child. She had wavy blonde hair and was wearing satin pants and a long blue tank top. As I got closer, I could see her face. Her pale skin was almost white as snow, with piercing green eyes. Her lips and fingers were blue. She looked very sad and very cold. I imagined it was because she was barefoot and had nothing on her arms. As I got about 3 feet away from her, she took a step towards me and said, in a chilling, soft, yet raspy voice, "Can you help me find my cat?" I shrugged and tried to smile. "Sure, where do you think he is?" She pointed to a truck parked in a driveway. I nodded and walked with her to the car. Before walking around it, I took off my jacket and offered it to her. "Here, you're gonna freeze to death." She smiled sadly, looking up at me. After a short pause, she whispered, "I already have." By then, I was getting freaked out by her. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything. Plus, I could see her breathing. I put my jacket around her shoulders, and for some reason, I was relieved when it stayed there. I made my way around the car. Sure enough, there was a kitten underneath. I reached in and pulled him out. To his surprise, he must have been focused on her. He purred in my arms and eagerly jumped to the girl when he saw her. She smiled at me, joyful tears now cascading down her snowy beige skin. She grinned wide and scratched the cat's ears. "Thank you so much." I smiled back, glad that she was happy. She turned to walk, and it was in the direction I was heading in. I made conversation after a moment, briefly reaching over to pet the kitten. We talked about the weather, work, music and the like. She was 17, named Hannah. She was out for a long time looking for her cat, freezing in the cruel December air. Of course, our talk was very short-lived, since I was close to home. "Jack," she said, "thank you so much for helping me." She grinned. "Of course," I said, blushing. She reached over and kissed my cheek. Her blue lips were like ice on my numb face. I shivered at the touch, though flattered that she did such a thing. I went to stammer a reply, but she had turned. Her words echoed in my head, and then I realized something. "Wait, I didn't tell you my name. How did you?" I asked, watching her walk away. She turned to look at me, smiled, and then vanished. Gatekeeper. Aliyah closed her sketchbook with a sigh and stood up, brushing dead leaves and pine needles from her jacket. She had completed the majority of the nature sketches she needed for class, and the saplings had served its purpose nicely. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and she didn't mind the time outside amongst the creaking trees. Her art teacher had assigned them 3 sketches for the evening, each to be taken from something different in nature. Aliyah had 2 completed, a rose bush and now the burgeoning white pine. She didn't know what she wanted for her third and final drawing of the afternoon, but she had time yet to wander in the woods, and was confident she would know when she saw it. Leaves rustled and crunched underfoot as she continued, returning to the old snowmobile trail she had followed out into the forest. The path always became a little hard to follow due to disuse as the seasons wore on through spring and summer, and would remain that way until the snows came. Maples, oaks, birches and beeches had shed most of their leaves and stretched skeletal arms towards one another, seeming to huddle in order to ward off the coming cold. The air had gained that distinct bite to it that comes with winter's approach. Still, the sun shone warmly through the trees, warming Aliyah's face. The woods were a beautiful place to be this time of year, and she drank in the life of the place with every breath. After a short while of hiking, Aliyah's eyes fell upon a fallen tree. It had long since begun to decompose, and a line of purple wildflowers grew atop it, the tree's death giving them life. She smiled. The flowers looked tiny, lavender-shaded trees, a forest within a forest, the woods in micro. It would do perfect for her third sketch. Aliyah sat cross-legged in front of the fallen tree. She took her sketch pad and pencil from her jacket pocket, brushed her long hair out of her eyes, and began. It was at least 20 minutes later that she first caught the shape moving in the corner of her eye. She looked up from her sketch pad and saw someone moving along through the trees, appearing and disappearing behind them as he went. Their shoulders were haunched, their eyes pointed at the ground, yet they moved quickly, striding like they had purpose. Due to the distance, Aliyah could only discern that they were wearing a dark-coloured hoodie, with the hood drawn up over their head. Aliyah's gaze shot between the stranger and the fallen tree. Never had she seen another person out in the woods here, and so she immediately felt desperate to discover who they were and why they were out in the forest. They certainly didn't seem to be enjoying themselves, whoever they were. Her curiosity eventually got the better of her. She closed the sketchbook, returning both it and her pencil to her pockets. She had the shapes of the picture drawn out and could manage the detailing and shading by memory later on. She hurried after the haunched figure, crunching leaves as she went. As Aliyah drew near, the figure stopped and turned to face her. It was a boy, somewhere near Aliyah's age too, and fairly diminutive in stature. He looked vaguely familiar. She had probably seen him at school. The boy's face was shaded from the hood, but still she could tell that he had dark rings sweeping under his eyes. He stood silently, hardly seeming to breathe. With dark, wary eyes he watched her, his demeanour that of someone who has been accused of a horrible crime for which they have no alibi. "Hi," Alia finally managed, after standing uncomfortably before the boy for a time. In a voice barely audible and with hardly any movement of his lips, he gave a "hi" in return. The uncomfortable silence returned. Alia realised she would have to be the one to speak yet again. "My name's Alia. Haven't I seen you around school? What's your name?" "Alec," he replied slowly, but a bit louder than before. He fidgeted and, perhaps feeling warm, swept back his hood. Alia recognised him at once, or rather his hair. She remembered seeing his face around, and up until several months ago, his face had always been capped with a crop of light brown hair. The boy had obviously been going through something of a phase, though. His hair was dyed a silvery white. Alec quickly noticed Alia staring, and quickly pulled his hood back up as he averted his eyes. The boy looked frightened, like he thought Alia was going to hurt him. The fact alone made Alia feel guilty. When the boy made eye contact again, she flashed him a reassuring, questioning smile. Alec shifted nervously from foot to foot, but seemed to be a little more at ease. He returned a small, friendly, "Oh, so you're not going to hurt me?" smile. "I'm doing some sketches for my art class." Alia drew her sketch pad halfway from her pocket to illustrate. "What brings you into the forest?" All of the improvements seen in Alec's demeanour vanished in a heartbeat. He returned Alia's quizzical look with a cold, icy stare. Without another word, he turned and began striding off the way he had been going. Alia took a few half-hearted steps after him. Immediately, Alec yelled over his shoulder, all of his vulnerable manner having evaporated, "Don't follow me." Alia was completely taken aback. She stood in shocked silence as Alec trudged away, shoulders hunched once more. Where could he be going that he was so secretive about? She chewed her lower lip as she stared after him. Her curiosity had always been able to get the better of her. She had gotten in trouble for that in the past. This time it seemed things would be no different. Once Alia was confident that Alec was far enough away that she could move without being heard, she began to follow after him. Wary of making too much noise, she tried to avoid dead leaves wherever she could. Several times Alec turned and scanned the forest behind him. Alia hid each time, and was each time sure that he would see her. However, her luck held, and after a while of hiking and hiding, Alec led her to a field. Alia stopped at the tree line, poking her head out from behind the reassuring cover of a large evergreen. The area wasn't a true field, it was circular, and not quite large enough to be called a field, but too large to be called a clearing too. Alec was walking toward two dark figures standing in the centre. Squinting, Alia saw they weren't figures at all, but a pair of stone columns, each about 6 or 7 feet tall. and made of dark basalt. The two cast long shadows in the sinking sun. Alia hadn't noticed the sun. It was low, too low, almost gone behind the trees. She would never be able to find her way back in the dark. Alia was a brave girl, but a strong feeling of uneasiness was rising inside her. Alec had his back to her now, and was crouching before the pillars. Alia had come this far, and there was a little point in turning back now. After all, it looked as if she might need the strange boy's help to escape from the forest. Maybe he had a flashlight in that sweatshirt of his. Leaving the tree line, Alia padded quietly up behind him. He hadn't noticed her yet, so she offered a quiet hello. Alec jumped up and whirled. Upon seeing Alia, his face flashed through a parade of emotions. Surprise, anger, and finally, fear. He didn't yell. Once again, he spoke quietly as a mouse. No, you're not supposed to be here. No one's supposed to be here. Not here. Not now. Not. He cast his eyes toward the sun. Only a tiny fringe of burning orange remained above the trees. Not now. The boy looked positively terrified. Before Alia could respond, he spoke again, this time louder, more frantic. You need to leave. It's not. Just go. You can't be here. He gestured wildly with his arms as he spoke. As he did, his hood slipped down, revealing his white head of hair. The last of the sunlight set it aflame. Alia stared at him, fear, curiosity and confusion, all chewing at her. Alec, calm down. What's wrong? Why are you even here? Alec wasn't listening. His gaze was directed toward the western horizon. The last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, and the fire atop Alec's head was snuffed out. Too late. Please, if you go now, you still have a chance. Run, and whatever you do, don't look back. Fear and madness burned in his eyes. Alia regarded him with a completely confused but increasingly frightened face. Whatever it was Alec thought was going to happen, it could only be something horrifically terrifying. Alia could see the boy's emotions were no act. Alia had gradually been becoming aware of a low hum, beginning to fill the air. Both Alia and Alec froze and stood silent, listening. Alec turned, staring at the stones standing behind him. Rigid and terrified, he turned and slowly looked defeated, like a man walking to his execution. Moved step by step to the stones. Alia was unaware that she had started moving backward, away from the bizarre scene unfolding in front of her. She wanted to run, knew she should, but some part of her wanted to see what happened next. The hum was growing, not even sounding like a hum anymore. It was more akin to a room full of whispers. Alec cast a final glance back towards her, sad and rueful. Before the two pillars, there was a circular stone set in the ground. Alec knelt down upon it, looking as if he was awaiting the headsman's axe. Darkness was creeping over the forest. Alec offered a final word. It's too late to run. If you run, they'll chase you. A shimmer appeared around him, as the whispers intensified. It looked like the boy was enshrouded in a heat shimmer, like those seen over hot asphalt. His whole body tensed. The whispers were almost deafening now to Alia, who stood rooted to the spot. They were coming from everywhere, from nowhere. She dropped to her knees and clamped her hand over her ears. But the whispers didn't abate. A second sound joined the chorus of murmurs. It took Alia a moment to realise that the sound was Alex's screams. There was an almost electric sounding snap. Blackness seemed to consume all light, pulled between the pillars, and Alec slumped to the ground. Alia's ears popped, and a gust of putrid air hit her. It was cold and filled with the smells of rot and decay. Following the air from the liquid darkness came a flurry of dark leaves. One of them skimmed Alia's face, and her skin stung where it touched. She fell to the ground, curling into a ball, clenching her eyelids tight together and keeping her hands over her ears. She had already seen too much. She knew she didn't think she could bear to see what came next. The air breezed around her, still filled with the smell of decomposition. She could feel them streaming out of the black, flowing out into the world. She could feel them standing over her, watching, puzzling. Only once did her eyes betray her, and Alia took a glance. Shadows, thick and dark like acrid smoke, dancing in the wind, flowed around her. Shapes surrounded her, horrible shapes of things that couldn't exist. Their words filled her head, though she understood not a word. They spoke in tongues, never meant to be heard by humans, unpronounceable, foul languages. Alia tried to tell herself it was all a dream, and that it would all vanish soon and be replaced by the warm safety of her bed. She tried, but her mind couldn't seem to form a cohesive thought. She knew only terror. The last thing Alia remembered before blacking out was the cold. It seeped into her, stealing her warmth until she had no more to give. Alia awoke to a bleak morning. She found herself in the large clearing still, her face pressed upon frost-coated blades of dead grass. Every bone in her body simply felt weary, almost incapable of movement. A thin coat of frost had formed across her and everything else. It was a struggle drawing herself, shivering, to a sitting position. "You're awake." Alia found Alec sitting with his back against one of the black pillars. His face looked gaunt, more drawn and weak than he had been before. His hair was whiter than she could have believed. What happened?" Alia managed shakily. Alec for a long time simply looked at her, fixing her with a sad, empty gaze before replying. "If they want to come through, they need someone to open the door for them. I was unlucky. They chose me. If I don't do this, one will eventually find their way through, and..." His voice trailed off. "They take a lot of energy," he added. He gestured at Alia's head, and his sorrowful look deepened. "And I wasn't the only one who helped them last night." Alia took a lock of her hair and held it before her eyes. It was completely white. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed tonight's scary stories, then don't forget to subscribe and click the like button. And don't forget to click the bell so you get notified every time I upload. And if you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.